Hello everyone, welcome to Under the Wing. I am your host, Andrew Wingard, and I am extremely grateful that you're sharing your time with us today. I am excited that I get the opportunity to share with you the experiences and stories from all walks of life. Gather round and let's begin. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here on the first episode of Under the Wing. I am your host, Andrew Wingard, and I'm pretty excited to get things started and get things going as this has been in the works here for a few months. And, I wasn't rushing anything. And, one of the things that you can do as you get older is, we make fun of some of that stuff growing up and our elders driving slow and doing things a little at a slower pace. It has some benefits. It has benefits to kind of just taking a step back and kind of just letting things happen. And so that's what I started doing with this podcast. I've been, again, it's been in the works for a few months and I just didn't want to rush it. And you got other things going on and life is happening. So I'm just going to let this sit here for a little bit. And I've been kind of looking and planning interviews with the guest and looking at how to do this and how to do that. And so throughout that process, what I've done is again, as I've waited and kind of been a little patient with it, someone said, hey, you should do an introduction podcast just to kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the podcast. And so, I thought that was a good idea. And, if I rush into this and I jump right into the interviews and start doing it, a few months back, I missed that idea. So that's the benefit. You get older, you take things a little bit slower, you're a little bit more patient with life. And so here we are, and I'm excited to kind of get things rolling here. And we'll just take care of some housekeeping items. And I'll talk a little bit about myself and kind of what inspired the idea of doing this podcast and talk a little bit about the book, which is, of course, part of the inspiration of where the podcast discussion came from. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, I just thank you for joining me today. And I promise I won't be too long, as I don't like talking about myself. And kind of the concept behind this podcast is to collect the stories and journeys of others. And so it'll be an interview format where, most of the talking from me will be just questions. And we'll be listening to others. And, I'm extremely grateful and extremely blessed that I've been able to make some connections over the past few years of traveling and doing different things and meeting some awesome people. And, I'm excited to get to know them a little bit better and kind of learn from them. As most of you who know me on a personal level know I'm an active learner. And I read a lot and I'm always trying to dive into how to get better. And I'm learning different stories. And I love stories because they connect us, but they also help us. And so, we all have a story and we all have unique stories, and they mold us and they create us and they help us get through dark times and light times and happy stories, sad stories, whatever it may be. We all have a story to share and we all have a journey to share. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into that. And, the idea behind this came from my brother. Well, I shouldn't say the idea came from my brother, but the thought of a podcast came from my brother. He said, as I was releasing this book about a year or so ago, he said, hey man, you should do a podcast. And at that point in time, I'm like, nah, I ain't doing that. Like, I don't really have the time to do that, I don't have the energy or willingness to want to do something like that. And, probably some months, I had the thought maybe back in January, I'm laying in bed and I had the thought, like, what if you do a podcast, but not something sports related, and do something that you love and do something that you're passionate about. And so I thought about that. I'm like, what do I love? And again, as I mentioned, I love to read. I love stories. I love learning. And so that's what I did. And so I thought about it. I'm like, I'm just going to create this podcast and just have some good feelings, some good people on here. I'm going to be interviewing chefs and community leaders, pastors, business leaders, teachers, athletes, everybody. Because again, we're all humans, right? And yes, we are all very different, but we all have a journey, and some of our journeys are a little bit similar and some aren't. And if you look at over the past few years and how much of I guess the separation we have had, and whether, different item and different agendas. And, I said, what if I can just be one bright spot on someone's day? And, whether it's a podcast where you can learn, or just a podcast just to put in the background, you could be cleaning or on your way to work. It could be just something positive, another positive light, as there are so many positive podcasts out there. I said, why not? And again, I'm extremely blessed that I've met the people that, I've connected with over the years. And so that's kind of the overall theme of what this podcast will look like. Again, interview based. And what happened is, as of right now, the first and last Monday of each month, I'll release a new podcast show. And so that's right now, that's the concept, and that's the itinerary in terms of the calendar throughout the year for doing that. And so there'll be 2 each month, and then, we'll kind of go from there, and hopefully my schedule doesn't get too crazy. I know during the fall, during the academic year, it gets a little wild, so that could change. But as of right now, I'm just looking at 2 times a month, and hopefully that doesn't change. But let's jump in a little bit, and again, I'll share a little bit about myself. Born and raised Saginaw, Michigan. Shout out to Michigan, and shout out to 989. Proud alumnus of Bridgeport High School, class of 2007. Shout out to my brothers and sisters, and from that class and all classes that we're connected. So appreciate all the memories and the love and the ups and downs through that time, and we'll kind of go pick up from there. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to dive into these questions really just pertaining to the book that I've received throughout the year. And, I'll address some of those. And what will happen is you'll get to know me throughout the conversations that I have with my guests. And also, hopefully this is going to give you a background of me just through this book. And again, my book name is After the Buzzer, Transitioning Your Sports Skills to Life. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. Please feel free to, any feedback is accepted. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed the read and was able to get at least something, whether it's a sentence out of it or there were many things that you can grab from it. I hope you guys were able to grab whatever that may be, whatever you need at that time. And again, it's a sports related book because it's pretty much a book kind of geared towards how I use the skills and some of the trainings from basketball to my life and how it kind of connected to one another. But there's a lot more other than sports that's inside that book. Again, a lot of my faith and just kind of life lessons that I've learned along the way. So again, hope you guys enjoy it. So what I'm going to do now is kind of just read an excerpt from this book, and this can kind of serve as another foundation for why this podcast was created. At work, we were recently celebrating a special gift from a donor. The donor brought up the concept of impact giving. His speech was so powerful. The donor talked about impacting the community and world, and how those who taught him impacted his journey. What transpired was an extremely generous gift to his alma mater. Not only did he share his finances, but he shared his story. This is how passing works in life. When we make an assist, we are giving our friends and teammates an opportunity to impact the game in the lives of others. And that's exactly what this podcast is about, right? As I mentioned, when we share our stories, we're giving someone else the power to get through, or the power to smile, the power to dream, the power to think about, I'm going to be talking to chefs, right? So I'm going to give somebody the power to be thinking about brisket or some famous mac and cheese or something, and just kind of just think outside the box a little bit. Again, this is just going to be a hopefully good feelings, good feels kind of podcast. And I hope you guys enjoy it. So that was actually from chapter 7 in my book titled One More. And that's another basketball reference. I won't go too far into that. But again, it kind of ties to that ability of sharing our story, right? Sharing our story and connecting with others. Again, we can connect. And we're so very different, but we're also so much alike. And so that's what we're going to do, is dive into some of these stories in this journey. All right. So let's look at some of these questions here. I apologize in advance. Right now the weather's going up and down, and so I'm going to have to wet the whistle a little bit, as my allergies are acting crazy right now and drainage. So I'm going to hopefully not stay on too long, so that way you guys don't hear too many of these coughs and think I got COVID or something. But all right, let's jump into this. What inspired you to write your book? So there are 2 points here. that I would like to touch on. So one, back in 2014, or they're actually both kind of connected a little bit. So back in 2014, I'm working at Texas Tech University down in Lubbock, Texas, and it's during Christmas break. And one morning I wake up and I can't sit up out the bed. Like literally I'm stuck. And I'm like, what is going on? So I'm thinking it's just stiff. Something's up with the bed. My pillow was messed up, whatever. So I'm just kind of sitting there staring at the ceiling, kind of rolling back and forth until I can get some motion to sit up. And so eventually I end up sitting up, go about my day, my normal routine, gym, cook, all that kind of stuff. Go to sleep, don't even think about it. Wake up the next morning, it happens again. This time I'm stuck in bed even longer. And so I'm like, what is going on? I finally get up and I immediately run to the urgent care and I'm like, look, bro, something's going on. I just literally had 2 days where I woke up and I couldn't get out the bed. And so, it ended up being something like fluid around my neck or my spine or something like that. And was able to I haven't had any situations like that before, but the inspiration really came from that. And, I thought to myself, like, well, like life can change, not even just death, but life in general. Our lifestyle, the way we live life can change overnight, literally overnight. And, at this point in time, I'm still a young professional. I'm only early 20s. So I'm like, man, I literally have nothing to leave anyone. And so I started journaling and I get the thought, I want to write a book real fast. But the book, of course, didn't come until 2020. But 2021, I should say. But I started journaling and just taking notes and collecting stories and thinking about my past and connecting the dots here and there. And so that's kind of how that all started. It's just out of fear, out of fear of like, man, if something happens to my lifestyle and maybe I won't even be able to write, what if something happens where I can't write or this and that, I'll never be able to share that. And so I started that back in 2014, and that was part of the inspiration. And the other part, of course, was being a student athlete. And mostly everyone who's been a part of athletics can relate to this and or has seen this in person, or seen it, whether it's from afar or something that's impacted them closely. But what happens is many of our student athletes, when they're done playing their respective sports, whether it's in high school or college, their transition into life after sports is very difficult. And within probably the past 10 years, that's been an issue that most universities are trying to tackle. And so in 2014, actually, is when I met Dr. Cooper, who was part of the Leadership Academy at Texas Tech. And so he was just getting started with that program for that exact reason. When you think about it, we're athletes, right? So you can't just put us into the game. I mean, I guess you can in a sense, but you just can't put us in the game and be like, oh, all right, go ahead and do this, right? It's the same thing for preparing for life after sports. You just can't graduate and be like, all right, this is how this should go. It needed to start during their time as athletes, right? And so just little by little kind of helping them prepare for life. And so as most of you have probably heard, it's just a tough transition because you're doing something for so long and then you're like, all right, what do I do next? How do I use the skills? What did I really learn? And, a lot of times student athletes, they're getting prepared for interviews and like, I didn't do nothing. I just played soccer. I just swim. Well, that is fully a lie, right? When you think about all of the lessons that you learned being a student athlete, but they just don't know how to use those skills. They don't know how to put it into resume or interviews or whatever it may be to transfer over to being a professional. And they need help in trying to translate that into that. And so it's not just one person's responsibility. It's not the coach's responsibility to help them. It's not the academic advisor. Everybody needs to put in a little hand with helping student athletes make sense of their journey, right? And so as I look back at my experience, being a student athlete, that's where this book came from. And I don't even like to call it a book. I really like to just call it a journal, because what happened is I started reflecting on my journey, and now I went into a profession that has very similar characteristics. I went into sales and, of course, now fundraising. But, you ask sales managers, they go after athletes because the characteristics needed to be a sales leader and just a salesperson in general. They tie hand in hand. But what I've learned over time is it doesn't just tie just to sales. It ties to all professions. It just needs to be tailored in the sense of whatever profession they're going into. And so, those were the things that inspired me to write this book. And I shouldn't say book, write this journal and kind of feel my thoughts with the world. And I wanted to just leave something here. I wanted to leave something here for somebody to read. And even if they get one thing, if they only use one sentence from the book is $15, right? And so most people spend that more than that at McDonald's, and and all they get is a stomach ache. So if you can spend $15 and get a laugh from this book, that's a positive for me, right? And so, we have a habit, and one of the OGs once told me, what we have a habit as humans of doing is cutting people off when they say something that we don't like or we don't agree with. And that's terrible, right? And I've tried to implement that in my life. We're humans, right? We're not all going to agree on everything, but if you're having a 30-minute conversation with somebody and within the first 2 minutes, someone says something that you don't like, we immediately shut off and we don't hear nothing else. So what happens is there's 28 minutes of information that you missed because you shut down, right? And so, thinking about like the virtuous cycle, someone talked about me about that. Like they hadn't heard anything about the virtuous cycle before. And I picked it up. I don't remember where I picked it up from, but the virtuous cycle is pretty much the idea of compounding effect, right? So I want to start my day off great. So what do I need to do as Andrew to start my day off great and continue compounding those great things, right? So I know some negative things that I don't do when I wake up first thing in the morning. I don't pick up my phone. Well, I do pick up my phone, and that's just to turn on some either meditation music or something else kind of calming. And but I don't jump on social media. I don't turn on my TV in the morning. I don't turn on the TV and watch TV shows or news or anything. I don't turn my TV on at all. So I don't know what's going on in the morning. And again, those are things that I do. And I'm not saying that's everyone's rule of thumb. You kind of have to make your own agenda. But that's how I build my virtuous cycle. And the idea is just build on good things and continue growing, continue building, right? So if you can just take one thing, one sentence from that book, I think that's a win for me. And that's all I really wanted to do. And so that's what inspired me to write that. Next question. What did you learn when writing the book? Well, this they say when you're self-publishing a book, it's pretty much like running your own business. And I after completing that, I 100% agree. There were so many nights where I just lost so much sleep because one, my thoughts were running, anxiety of putting it out and pressing publish. There was so much that went into that. It was really stressful, to be honest, because it was your work. Like it wasn't like I was writing a fiction book, right? This is nonfiction. So this is literally my journal about some parts of my life. And so, it was extremely stressful. I learned to, I started using like sleep music to kind of calm my mind before bed. And that's something that I didn't start doing until I think I started putting this book together, because my mind would be racing so much and I just needed it to calm down. And I don't know if a pastor said this or I read it in a book, but he said if you're up late at night and you can't go to sleep, maybe God needs to ask you something. So I call myself up late at night sometimes. I'll be like, bro, what you need? You know what I mean? And so I started keeping my laptop and my notepad by me, and sometimes I would get thoughts, and what happens is I just kind of write them down and jot them down so that way I don't forget them in the morning. So it is a business. So I learned if you're ever thinking about writing a book, treat it like a business, because you're definitely going to have some long nights. And also learn to document your stories early, right? Document your stories and your memories. Because what happens as we get older, those stories get fuzzy. And so if you don't got the people around to ask the questions about the stories, then you're out of luck. So you got to figure out how to document those stories and do it early in time. So those are a couple nuggets in terms of what I learned when writing. What was the most challenging part about writing the book? A lot of people say it's the writing part. The writing wasn't hard at all. Hard at all. I don't know why. Gotta get that out. But the writing was not hard at all. It was putting it together. which is what I struggle with, getting it to flow. And some of you know this, but I barely graduated high school. I failed a lot of classes. I think I graduated like a 1.7. I think I took the ACT twice and got 14 on both tests. So it's not like I am not the brightest bulb in the batch there. And so it was hard getting it to flow and make sense. So that's why I actually hired an editor to help me out with that. And so she was awesome, phenomenal work. And she was able to cut it down. She's like, what does this even mean, man? This does not need to be here. And so she was extremely helpful. And that was the challenging part, is making sure it flowed, right? Because the concept, of course, was tied to basketball. And I wanted to make sure that if someone who doesn't even know what basketball is, they can, it's not like, I didn't want it to be so tied to athletics and so tied to my sport that you couldn't connect with it. And so that was a big thing for me, is making sure that the average person can connect to it. Now, there are some basketball terms that if you don't know basketball, you won't know it. But at the end of the day, the analogies kind of can stick, hopefully. And so she worked with me a lot in making sure that it flowed well, but also made sure that, people could understand it, even if they had a small understanding of basketball, even if they had no understanding of basketball. Because again, it's not filled with basketball analogies. It's life, my faith, my family, my journey, and stories. Again, stories mean so much. So that's what's inside the book. But that was the most challenging part to me, is getting those two things to flow and making sure that people could really understand what I meant when writing it. So that was it. So why did you dedicate your book to the coach? Man, shout out to my dog, Dougie Fresh, man. I love you, brother. Love you and your family, man. My guy's over at Tulsa right now doing some good things, and I couldn't be more proud, as he was destined to get back to the college game, and I'm happy to see him there. But, it's a long story, man. I won't spend too much time on that. I met Coach in 2006, my first year playing AAU basketball, played with the Central Michigan All-Stars, and Coach was just special, man. And I don't know a ton of people like him. And you look at his body of work and what he stood for. And I'll share this quick story. So 2009, I'm in college at this time. My coach says, hey, man, I got this camp I think you should go to in Chicago. And so I'm like, man, I don't know how I'm going to get to Chicago. And so I don't know how the conversation went, because it was so long ago. But all I know is Doug took me to Chicago. And so we ended up going to Chicago and balling out at that camp, man. And I had a blast. But it's like the little things like that, man. I just hope one day that I could be a percentage of what Doug was to me. Like, I know I will never be who he was, because it's just not in me to be who he is. And I don't know if everybody can be a Doug Brotherton. But I can try to be a small percentage of who he was to me. And I hope that, I can do that in some way, shape, or form. And maybe hopefully this book is a little bit of that. But if I could give him the world, man, I would, because he just changed the trajectory of my life. And again, I was never a bad kid. I was just, I just was very unproductive. And, he kind of helped me set the sail, and the rest has been history, man. That summer, again, changed everything for me. And without that summer, I honestly, I don't know where I'd be right now. That would be a great question, because it's hard to even think about what I would be doing right now, because I don't know. I didn't have no plan. I didn't have much guidance. So I don't know. I don't know where I would be without him. So that's why I dedicated that book to him and his family, man. I love his family. They kind of keep their arms around me, and they've always showed me love and support. So I'll always love them for that. And do you have any advice for someone looking to write a book? Let's see. I think I got a few things. One, just start, and I think sometimes we want to just all want to write a book, and then I'm going to write 100 pages tonight. Like it doesn't work like that. It just takes baby steps, you know what I mean? And, I talked about stories earlier, documenting your story. So there's this project called Homework for Life. And I forgot what book that was in, but I do it professionally as well as I do it personally. And so what Homework for Life is just pretty much documenting stories and memories as you go. So it's not like a journal in a sense, because the journal you can kind of spend an hour writing a journal with your thoughts, or you can spend 10 minutes writing a journal. But the stories, Homework for Life, is pretty much just documenting your stories throughout, your week. And I mean, you can write what happened during the day in 5 minutes on your phone, whether Google Drive or notebook on your phone. I mean, I keep a Google Drive on my phone. And so every time I hear a story, I'll, or I'm in a meeting or something comes up, I jot that story down at the end of the night. So every night at 9:00, I get this alert on my phone, and it says Homework for Life. And I think, all right, did I have a story today that I can write? And if I do, I'll write it and jot it down. If I don't, I ignore it. And so, start documenting those stories right now. That would be part of that advice. And go back and start asking your mom and your grandparents those stories that you probably haven't asked or talked about, right? Go back and talk about some of those stories. That would be some of those things. And the second one, I said, actually that was number 2. So the first one was just start, write down, start a journal, and, kind of go from there. Because what happened for me is when I started journaling in 2014 at Tech, that journal turned into a blog. And then that blog turned into the foundation for the book. And so those things, now it took me 6 years to put the book together. And to be honest, if we're being honest, COVID is the only reason After the Buzzer was ever born, because my life everything stopped during COVID. And as terrible as it was an extreme blessing on my end from that perspective, because life stopped and it was like, all right, well, this is, you're going to do it, bro. This is it. And this is the time to do it, put it together and let it go. And so, I'm grateful for that time that was away from everybody. And it was extremely hard, to be honest. But at that same point, I was able to kind of put together the book in a sense to get it ready to go out. The one thing that I did while writing the book, again, as I told you, the most challenging part for me was putting the book actually together. And so what I did was I went to Office Max. I got like 6 or 7 of those whiteboards, the thin ones, the cheap ones, kind of like the paper. And then I got some erasable markers and an eraser. And so what I did was, on each board, I put the chapter, the title, a quote or a scripture or something, the main point for this chapter, the 3 main points for this chapter, the big idea. And so I did that for each chapter that I was planning to have in that book. And I didn't start putting the book together until I had completed that layout for each chapter. Once I had the layouts completed, that's when I started putting the book together. It was a little easier for me then at that point, because I could see what were the main points, and it helped me, when you're talking about putting the book together and you're wanting it to flow, wanting it to make sense. I just didn't want to be jumping all around. And so that helped me tremendously. And you guys can do that. You don't have to get as drastic as I did in terms of putting up whiteboards all over your place. You can do it in a notepad. But for me, I needed the visual. I needed to say, all right, if something comes up, I'm going to go out and write it on that board. Or if I don't want this on there anymore, I'll go and erase it. It was visual for me, because every time I came home, or every time, I stood up and got coffee or went to get something to drink or went to the bathroom, I saw the whiteboard. So it was a visual stimulation for me, like, bruh, what's going on here? You know what I mean? And honestly, even sometimes, especially during COVID, when we were watching church sermons through virtual, like there would be things that a pastor would say, and I'm like, oh, and it would trigger, and it started triggering some writing. And so the reason why I kept that there is I can always erase and add. And so that's what I liked about putting those boards all around my place. But if you always got company over, you might want to find somewhere a little bit more private to do something like that. But those are the 3 things that, there's a lot that I could say in terms of advice for writing the book, but I wanted to keep this under 30 minutes. And so I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. Again, please feel free to share with family and friends. And if there's anyone that you guys think would be a great person to have on the show, and you think they want to share their story and their journey, please let me know. Reach out to me, private message me, some of you guys, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, text message. If you think someone would want to be on the show and you think they would be a good guest, let me know. Again, I'll make sure I'll try to plug in and introduce myself. And that's what this is all about. We just want to have some good feels and some good vibes, and just learn from one another and connect with one another. And hopefully that's what this podcast can do. So thank you all for joining me for the first episode. And I definitely look forward to catching up with you all pretty soon. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for listening to Under the Wing. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoyed today's show and you would like to support the podcast, tell a friend or two, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Facebook at Under the Wing with Andrew. Again, thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.